Well, hey folks, hope you're doing well today. I'm David Robinson, and I'm really glad you're tuning in to CCC. I remember my dad telling me about when he was in high school. I believe it was like 1956, and he and some of his friends, 4 classmates of his, 4 buddies, they decided to travel from their home of Elizabethton, Tennessee to Knoxville, Tennessee, about an hour and a half away, to see Louis Armstrong in concert. And they all rode down together in a 1940 Chevrolet. Now, he said the trip down was pretty uneventful, and the concert, he said, was fantastic. But the hour and a half trip home got pretty interesting. What happened was the car battery or the alternator or something about that 1940 Chevy, it didn't have enough juice for him to run the car and run the headlights at the same time. Something was awry. You know, the headlights and the car couldn't function at the same time. In those days, the 2-lane highways they traveled on didn't have any streetlights or anything like that. So they were in a bit of a pickle because they had to be home that night. So they came up with a solution, and their solution was to have one of the 4 of them ride on the front bumper of that 1940 Chevrolet and shine a flashlight at the side of the road so they knew where the edge of the road was and wouldn't run off of it. And bumpers, they weren't like they are now, where the bumper's all sort of one piece that blends into the front of the car. No, those were big old separate honking bumpers then. But for an hour and a half, one of them rode on the front bumper of that car, just shining a flashlight on the edge of the road. So I asked my dad, I was like, hey, how did you determine who rode out on the front bumper? Like, did you draw straws or do like a rock, paper, scissors kind of thing or something like that? And he said, I don't really remember. And I said, were you the one who rode on the front bumper? And he's like, no. I said, well, how come? And he said, well, it was my car, so I got to drive it. And he couldn't remember who the guy was that was the one who rode out on the front bumper with that flashlight. But I imagine it being a guy named Skeeter, you know? I mean, that just sounds like the name of a guy who would ride an hour and a half on a front bumper in the middle of the night, shining a flashlight on the side of the road, doesn't it? Skeeter. I asked my dad what else he remembered about that drive, and he said, well, there wasn't much traffic, so that was good. And it was a pleasant evening. And I was thinking, maybe for you it was a pleasant evening, but how about Skeeter? Do you think Skeeter thought it was a pleasant evening? I mean, like if it was cold out, Skeeter was probably frozen. If it was hot out, he was picking bugs out of his teeth, you know? 3 things come to my mind about this story. A, cars have come a long way since 1956, and now we're fortunate to live in a time where you can run the engine and the lights at the same time. What a time to be alive. 2, I'm glad our roads and highways now have lights all about them, shining on the road at different points, illuminating the signs as we go along. And D, not surprisingly, I never heard this story when I was learning to drive when I was 16. I mean, I'd have been grounded for a year if I'd have pulled that stunt. Well, we all get this though. We have to have some light if we're going to find our way along the road. We got to have a light to get us where we need to go. Which brings us to today and week 2 of this series called I Am. We're seeking to get clarity about who Jesus is. I mean, who is Jesus? That's the question John is obsessed with in his gospel, and he pushes us to be obsessed with it too. It's so vitally important to have an accurate biblical understanding of Jesus. Unfortunately, so many of us, we just don't. We've fashioned a picture of Jesus as we prefer him, reimagining him how we want rather than who he really is. Like Robert Bowman and J. Ed Kamatsky, who wrote in their book, Putting Jesus in His Place, interpretations of Jesus are fraught with bias. He's a powerful figure whom people want on their sides, and they're willing to recreate him in their image to enlist his support. Animal rights activists imagine a vegetarian Jesus. New Agers make him an example of finding God within. Frankly, it's hard to escape the feeling that our culture has taken Jesus' question, who do you say that I am, and changed it to, who do you want me to be? You know, we do the same thing, no doubt. I mean, today we reimagine Jesus in the image we prefer him to be. For instance, a popular one today, you know, we might call him permissive Jesus, who's pretty much good with however we want to live because after all, he's got to forgive us anyway, right? Or a close cousin of permissive Jesus is one we'll call universalist Jesus, who affirms all dogs along with everyone and everything else goes to heaven. Or how about this one, good luck charm Jesus, who, if we approach him in just the right way with the right tone, will help us find our lost keys or make our wishes come true. You know, there's Mr. Rogers Jesus, a lot of folks hold to, where we just think he's a nice guy with nice sayings who did some nice things a long, long time ago. Or hipster Jesus, he shows up from time to time, usually in the form of celebrity pastors who wear really cool sneakers and skinny jeans and seem to have lots of reasons to curse and drink a bunch of beer. Or Buddy the Elf Jesus, who's incredibly likable but ridiculously innocent and gullible about what's really going on in the world. There's MMA Jesus who can take a punch with the best of them, or patriotic Jesus who's all about the flag and gun rights. Stick it to the man Jesus who doesn't trust anyone in charge and pretty much wants to lead a societal revolution every Tuesday after drinking local coffee. We have fashioned a Jesus we prefer, one that suits our needs. But how about we let Jesus define himself in his own words? That's what this series we've embarked on is trying to unpack. What Jesus said about himself, specifically in the Gospel of John, with all these I am statements where Jesus fills in the blank for us to clarify who he really is. Last week, we kicked it off with one of the most profound statements Jesus said about himself. It's the basis for really understanding him. If you missed it, why did you miss it? Like, you shouldn't have missed it. What were you doing that you missed it? Like, drop whatever you're doing now and go back and watch week 1. I mean, seriously, go back and then come back. I'll still be here. Today, week 2, Jesus said this about himself: I am the light of the world. You know, if you got a Bible, get to the 9th chapter of the Gospel of John, because I want us to look at this episode where Jesus heals a man who was born blind. And in the middle of that, he makes that statement: I am the light of the world. Now, this story here in John 9, we can think about it in terms of 3 different scenes. And the first scene begins with a question. All right, check it out. As he went along, he saw a man blind from birth. His disciples asked him, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? All right, so Jesus and his disciples are rolling along, and they come across a man who was born blind. And the disciples, they asked Jesus a question that stemmed from a widely held belief that terrible punishments came on certain people because of their sin or the sin of their parents. They say, hey, is this guy's blindness a result of his own sin or the sin of his family? Again, it was a widely held understanding of things. I mean, the religious leaders taught that any misfortune was the direct result of somebody's sin. Even when a child came into the world with a debilitating disease or a birth defect or developmental issue, you know, I would say it's still a widely held belief today. It's like karma-ish that we hold to. And Jesus' disciples, they bought into the same kind of thinking with their question: who sinned, this guy or this guy's parents? And Jesus says, neither. He kind of shoots down that belief, that whole karma deal. This guy wasn't blind because he or his parents sinned. He was blind because he was born into a world that's been twisted by sin. And all of us, I mean, all of us, gang, we suffer the affliction of evil in varying degrees because of sin. That's reality. Well, as soon as Jesus corrects the theology of his disciples, that's when he declares, I am the light of the world. And again, if you're taking notes, that's our I am statement right there. I am the light of the world. And then he takes this guy, this blind guy, and he decides that he's going to heal him. He's going to give him his sight. What's so very fascinating to me is how Jesus decides to heal this guy. Check it out, verse 6. Having said this, he, Jesus, spit on the ground, made some mud with the saliva, and put it on the man's eyes. Go, he told him, wash in the pool of Siloam. So the man went and washed and came home seeing. You understand, like, Jesus could have done anything to heal this guy. He's got all the power at his disposal. I mean, he could have just clapped his hands, clap on, clap off kind of thing. Or he could have snapped his fingers, or waved his hand around, or just said some magic words like skadoosh or Shazam or expecto patronum or something like that, and the guy would have been healed. But instead, Jesus spits on the ground, makes these little mud pies, and takes the mud pies and rubs them on the man's eyes. That's his method for healing him. It's like the Big Papi method of healing, spits on his hands, rubs some dirt on it, and makes these spit pies and then shoves them in the guy's eyes. Now, you got to figure the disciples are watching all this, and they're like, did he just do what I think he just did? Man, Jesus, that is not cool. Why would you do that? That is so not right. And just think about how the blind guy feels. Like, did you just spit? Did someone just spit? Why is everyone groaning? What's this ointment you're putting on my eyes? I mean, the blind guy, he didn't even see it coming, you know? And after he takes the mud spit pies and he rubs them in the blind guy's eyes, Jesus says, go and wash, right? Which he really didn't have to tell the blind guy to do. I mean, that's a no-brainer. Go and wash. You better believe I'm going to go and wash. You just hocked a divine loogie and rubbed it in my eyes. Maybe this is where our moms get it from, you know, where they take their saliva and clean our face with it. I mean, who knows? Anyway, the blind guy goes and washes his eyes and he's healed. He can see. He's a new man. It's a miracle. Now that's scene one, the actual healing of this guy. And some of you know what this is like. I mean, not to be healed of blindness, but to enter into a relationship with Jesus, to meet Jesus somewhere along the line. And because of it, well, you're a different person. You're a changed man or a changed woman. You stepped into a relationship with Jesus and he brought the light into your life. And suddenly you can see. A whole lot of you are part of this church. You're part of CCC because someone, maybe a buddy of yours or a friend of yours, maybe somebody in your family, they said to you a year ago or 5 years ago or 10 years ago, you know, whenever, they invited you to come along, to come to church with them. And along the way, they've kind of pushed you to get to know Jesus because, well, he's your only hope. And because of that, well, it's a brand new you. This blind guy, he's introduced to Jesus and it totally alters his world. He's healed. He can see because Jesus brings light and life. All right. So that's scene one. Now here's scene two. And it comes in the midst of all this tension between Jesus and the religious leaders of the day, the Pharisees. The Pharisees, they're trying to figure out who Jesus is, and they're not too thrilled with him because he's messing with their idea of faith and God. And he's going about things differently than their understanding of faith and God. So they call in this formerly blind fellow and they start to quiz him about what happened and who Jesus is. And the religious leaders, they're all divided about what to think about Jesus. Like verse 16 says, some of the Pharisees said, hey, this man's not from God, for he doesn't keep the Sabbath. But others asked, how can a sinner do such miraculous signs? And so they were divided, the Bible tells us. Finally, they turned to the blind man. What have you to say about him? It was your eyes he opened. The man replied, he's a prophet. All right, so they got this ex-blind guy there. It's sort of like an IRS audit, and they want to know what happened. And the guy formerly known as the blind guy is not real prepared for this moment. And I think he's kind of searching for the right answer that he thinks these religious guys want to hear. He's not really sure. So he's kind of trying to give them the right religious answer. And so they turn to the ex-blind guy and ask him what he thinks about Jesus, who Jesus is. And he says, he's a prophet. I really believe he just sort of blurts it out because he's not really ready for this. This whole interview kind of catches him off guard. And so he answers, a prophet, maybe even with the little question, like, a prophet? So I think he's totally unprepared and completely guessing at this point when he's asked who Jesus is. A prophet? Like he really didn't know. And I think we're sometimes in the same boat. We don't really know either. Of course, that's what this whole series is about. You know, who is Jesus? That's the question. If we don't get this question right, well, we're in big trouble. So that's scene two. Now to scene three, and it takes place a little while later, and the religious leaders are continuing their little investigation. They want to explain what's happened with this healing. They just want to explain it away. They don't want to face the reality of who Jesus is and what he's done. And so they summon the ex-blind guy again, and they ask him again, who in the world is this Jesus guy? I mean, they say, we think he's a sinner. What do you think? And this time, well, he has a different approach. I think he's figured some things out now. So they summon him again and they say, hey, give glory to God. We know this man is a sinner. And he says in verse 25, whether he's a sinner or not, I don't know. One thing I do know, I was blind, but now I see. Man, I don't know, but here's what I do know. I was blind and now I see. He tells the story of the difference that Jesus has made in his life. The lights have come on for him, literally. He's met the light of the world, and life is ushered in for him in an incredible new way. Now, this is the first time he tells this story like this, but you can bet your bottom dollar it wasn't the last time he told the story of what Jesus had done in his life. I bet he told it thousands and thousands and thousands of times. I mean, can you imagine him telling this story again and again to folks he meets? Hey, you ought to get to know Jesus. Well, why should I? Well, let me tell you what happened to me. I was blind, I met Jesus, and now I see. And they say, well, who's Jesus? And he's like, well, he's the light of the world, and he brought light into my darkness. And that's what happens over and over and over again when people come in contact with the light of the world. Some of you may remember in the Bible about a woman who was caught in the middle of an act of adultery. It's actually found one chapter earlier in the 8th chapter of John. Incredibly embarrassing situation to be caught in. And she's dragged out in the public square, and she's going to be stoned to death. But then Jesus, he kind of confronts the self-righteousness of the Pharisees there, and they decide not to stone her. And so Jesus says, hey, I don't condemn you either, but don't sin like this anymore. Walk a new walk. Head out with a new life. Jesus, he brought light into her darkness, and he led her into life. You think about what that woman is going to tell people for the rest of her life. She's going to say, you know what? I reached a low point in my life, such that I was filled with shame. And man, I got caught in a deal, and my shame was overwhelming to me. But I met Jesus Christ, and he gave me a new start. He didn't condemn me. He showed me grace, and he shined the light into my life as he spoke the truth to me. And it set me on a whole new course because Jesus is the light of the world. Some of you know about a character in the Bible named Zacchaeus. It's in Luke 19, and he's living for money. Man, his whole thing is about money. And Jesus goes to his house for dinner, comes out the other side of that dinner, and Zacchaeus says, hey, I'm going to pay back all that I've stolen and extorted from people. I'm going to give half my net worth to the poor. Can you imagine what he told people for the rest of his life? And he's going to say, I got to tell you something. I fell into a pattern where my whole life was about money. I mean, greed had a grip on me, and it distorted every relationship in my life. But I met Jesus Christ at dinner one night, and he set me free from the tyranny of greed to really care about people, particularly the poor. That's what Jesus Christ did for me. He freed me. He shined the light into my life, and he got me focused in a whole new direction. This is really what Jesus does in a life, like no one else and nothing else. I mean, some people, their life is all about fear, just afraid of everything. They meet Jesus and light invades their life, and he gives them confidence and courage. His presence in their life steadies them. Some people are all about impressing, just image management stuff. They meet Jesus, he ushers in the light into their life, and now it's about servanthood and humility and the freedom to love without having to impress, caring very little about what people think. I mean, they start living for an audience of one. Some people say, hey, before Jesus, I just had this plaguing sense of aloneness. Came out of a broken family. I felt alone and isolated. I met Jesus, though, and the light that he brings, it just changed everything. He adopted me into his family where I feel alive and I'm living like his child now. I mean, the companionship and security he's brought into my life is unrivaled. And that's who a lot of you all are. I mean, you used to be one way, and you'd still be that way. You'd still be that man or that woman if Jesus hadn't come into your life. And you're not all together yet, but you're gaining steam in your life. The light is growing brighter. I mean, as Proverbs 4 says, the path of the righteous is like the first light of dawn, growing ever full to the full light of day. These things we're talking about here, the loneliness, the image management, the greed, the lust, the fear, they're all just symptoms of the same reality that we live in darkness, gang. Our world is a dark place apart from God, and our lives are dark places apart from the light and the life of Jesus Christ. I mean, this is why this matters so very much. The human condition we find ourselves in is this. We just walk in darkness apart from God, apart from his presence and goodness, his wisdom and love and direction and care. We just walk in darkness. We have to grasp that the world's a dark place, And we will never find our way or see reality unless Jesus is our light. In fact, it's hard to grasp all the truth about Jesus unless we grasp this truth about him first. I don't think it takes much convincing to grasp that the world is dark. I mean, just look around at the mess of our world. Violence, injustice, abuse of power, war, refugees fleeing. That's our world. And part of the way the world is dark is that no one knows enough to cure the evil and suffering in it. I mean, we like to think we do, which again is part of the way the world is dark. We like to think, hey, yes, Dave, there's darkness, but we can overcome it ourselves. And so we look to ourselves. We look to the state, or we look to the market, or, we look to technology. Things are dark, but we believe we can end that darkness with intellect and innovation, education and enlightenment. In other words, we have the light within us, and so we are the ones who can dispel the darkness of the world. We can overcome poverty and violence and evil. If we work together, we can create some world of unity and peace. But can we? Really? I mean, one of the most thoughtful world leaders of the late 20th century was Václav Havel, the first president of the Czech Republic. He had a unique vantage point from which to peer deeply into both socialism and capitalism, and he wasn't optimistic that either would, by itself, solve the greatest human problems. This is what he wrote. Pursuit of the good life will not help humanity save itself, nor is democracy alone enough. A turning to and seeking of God, he wrote, is needed. The human race constantly forgets that we are not God. I mean, he puts it well. Humanity can't save itself. In fact, he argues that the belief that we can save ourselves, that some sort of political system or ideology can fix human problems, that's only led to more darkness. See, the lie we buy into is we are the light of the world. Some of you might know who Deepak Chopra is, sort of a spiritual guru for our current times. He said it this way: all the answers are already within you. There's an inner intelligence within you, which is the ultimate and supreme genius, which mirrors the wisdom of the universe. And it's not your mind. Actually, it's your spirit. It's the source of the mind. Therefore, anything that helps you quiet the mind and reflect in quietness, you will see that you have all the answers. The answers may come to you in the form of an insight, intuition, imagination, coincidence, what spiritual traditions called the grace of the divine. You see, that is completely opposite of what Jesus says. The message of Jesus, the Christian message is not, hey, if we just pull together, we can make the world a better place. And it's not just look deep within you for the answers. The message of Christianity is things are really dark and we can't heal or save ourselves, but there's a hope because there's a light, and his name is Jesus. And this light doesn't come from the world. It's not sprung from the world. It comes from outside. Jesus has brought that light to save us. Indeed, Jesus is the light. I mean, earlier in John chapter 3, it's so definitive how he says it. Listen to it. This is the verdict. Light has come into the world. Jesus brings a new life to replace our spiritual deadness because he shows us the truth that heals our spiritual blindness. And check this out, gang. He walks with us even into and through the valley of the shadow of death where no other companion can go. He is the light for us when all other lights go out. Is Jesus your light? Because we're all taking our cue from somewhere. I mean, what's illuminating your path? Honestly, what's guiding you? What's influencing you? Showing you which way to go? Because we all have something we look to. And CCC, I see this all the time. I mean, time and time again. We try to hold on to Jesus and we try to hold on to something or someone else. We're trying to get a little Jesus in there, but really we got something else that we're trying to light our path with. Or we're trying to light our path with ourselves, from within us. And that breaks down eventually because Jesus makes it clear he's the light. Some of us are wanting Jesus to play a part, like we want him to meet a need or two, Like we want him in the car, so to speak, but in reality, he's in the back seat. He's not out on the front bumper, you know? And we want to go our own way. We want him to come along with us for sure, but we want to go where we want to go. And he's not the light of our life, giving direction and guiding our way. The kind of life we want and that Jesus promises, there's only one way to obtain it, and it's through him, the light of the world, with him lighting the way and showing the path. Jesus has got to be on the front bumper, shining the light. So I guess the question to ask is this: is Jesus your Skeeter? And listen, he's risked way more than Skeeter ever did on that front bumper. Is he your Skeeter? You know, some of you, I know you're struggling, you're frustrated, you're thinking, I can't seem to figure this out. I can't do this. I mean, I come to church, but my life's no different than anybody else's. I can't make my life work. Well, gang, he's got to be the leader. He's got to be in the prime position. He's got to be the truth of your life. Is he the light of your world? What's really guiding you? Because Jesus said, I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will never walk in darkness, but will have the light of life.
We're going to pause and take a few moments to reflect on Jesus' sacrifice on the cross. So go ahead and grab some bread and juice so you can fully participate in communion. Each week we get together, we center around what Jesus has done for us, because it's through his sacrifice that we receive God's incredible grace and we're forgiven. We eat some bread and remember that Jesus gave himself up for us, and we drink some juice to remember that his blood was spilled. You're invited to remember what Jesus has done for you and take communion in your own time. Let's remember Jesus.
Your mercy never failed me. All my days I've been held in your hands. From the moment that I wake up until I lay my head, I will sing of the goodness of God. All my life you have been faithful. All my life you have been so, so good. With every breath that I am able, I will sing of the goodness of God. I love your voice. You have led me through the fire in darkest night. You are close like no other. I've known you as a father, I've known you as a friend. goodness of God. Your goodness is running after, it's running after me. Your goodness is running after, it's running after me. With my life laid down, I'm surrendered now. I give you everything. Your goodness is running after, it's running after me. All my life you have been faithful. All my life you have been so, so good. With every breath that I am able, I will sing of the goodness of God. All my life you have been faithful. All my life you have been so, so good. With every breath that I am able, I'm gonna sing of the goodness of God. I'm gonna sing of the goodness of God.
Thanks for tuning in and making CCC Online a part of your week. I hope this online service is exactly what you needed today. In the message, Dave mentioned that there's a daily reading guide and small groups that go along with this I Am series. You know, it's not too late to jump in and make the most of this time heading up to Easter. Just head over to communitycc.net and you can sign up for a group or download the reading guide. CCC's website is also a great place to go if you'd like to contribute financially towards helping people find their way back to God. You can click the Give tab and make a donation, or if you'd rather, you can text CCC White Marsh to the number on the screen. They're both safe and secure ways to support CCC's mission financially. Thanks so much for your continued generosity. It makes everything this church does possible. Things like PJ Day that's coming up on March 27th. You know, the fun part is all the C3 kids are invited to wear their pajamas to church that day. And the impactful part is we're collecting brand new sets of 2-piece pajamas for critically ill children. Here's how it works. You buy some new PJs, infant to teen sizes, and then you just bring them with you to CCC on Sunday, March 27th and drop them off during services. These fun new pajamas will brighten a child's hospital stay. Thanks again for tuning in and spending some time with CCC. Make sure and say hi on social media, and we'll see you right back here next time. Take care, everybody.